Hello and welcome to this edition of Google Firestarters. So my name is Neil Perkin. I'm the moderator and facilitator for Google Firestarters. And for the uninitiated, Firestarters was a series of events we ran for about 10 years at Google. So focusing really on the areas of challenge and opportunity really of the marketing and advertising industry. And we also had people who are the interested and interesting of the industries who'd like to say, speak. And so we pivoted obviously into a series of virtual chats. And today's guest is interested and interesting. I'm glad to introduce Lucy Jameson, who's the co-founder of Uncommon Creative Studios. So welcome to Lucy. Would you care to introduce yourself, Lucy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy. I guess we started Uncommon 3 years ago. Before that, I was chief exec of Grey. And before that, I spent nearly 20 years at DDB, from grad trainee through to global head of planning. So I guess I've bounced around, but very agency focused all my life.
Brilliant, and welcome to Firestarters, Lucy. So as you know, Firestarters is based around sort of 5 key questions really. So we ask around sort of learning and the biggest mistake you've made in your career, but also about predictions for the industry, where the industry is going, and also the kind of catch-all question at the end, which is about the question that I wish you wish that I'd asked you. So if I can straight into the first question, if that's all right. Really interested to know what's the best thing that you've learned in your career to date over those years of working in agencies. So what would that be?
They're really big, difficult questions, these. They really made me think quite hard. I think that the most important thing I've learned in my career is actually to find your crew, find the people who you really work well with. Very often they're quite different from you, but find those people who make you better and smarter and who you love working with, and then you're going to have fun and produce great work. I've always loved that quote from Margaret Mead: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And for me, that's sort of really true in our business. You can't really do anything on your own. So you've got to find the best people to work with and really make them your crew.
And is that, because I love that quote as well, it's just brilliant, isn't it? And there's also the idea of like, you're the kind of average of the 5 people you spend most time with. I think that idea. So is that really about who you can learn from, I suppose, and the people that you surround yourself with?
Yeah, it's who you can learn from, who brings out the best in you, who's different to you. All of those things. I mean, I was super lucky in my career. You know, DDB was BMP, so it was the home of planning, and there were some brilliant kind of luminaries there, like kind of Paul Feldwick and people like that. But some of the smartest planners, Les Burnett, Sarah Carter, who just, I learned an awful lot about planning and the craft skills and the kind of details of that. But then as I kind of got you know, more senior in my career, actually it was those partners in crime you had, you know, so great, brilliant suits who were people like Karen Buchanan and Zav Rees, who are all kind of now running agencies. But probably most importantly, it's those creatives who, you know, just take your ideas, force you to think harder, jump, work better, but also who you've got a kind of enough of a common understanding, but enough difference. And I think that's the kind of brilliant thing, isn't it? Whenever we're trying to hire or look at that, I'm always looking for people who share some of the same values, but, you know, who bring each time something really different, who approach a problem in a way I never would have done. And that, for me, that makes it much more fun as well. I like working with lots of people who think a little bit differently to me. So that just makes our day job, I think, you know, a lot more interesting. But also it's that kind of thing, you know, when you start an agency, when we started Uncommon, we had to resign from Grey, and we all had to sit together and agree we were going to resign. We couldn't have anything on paper. We couldn't have any legal agreements that in a year's time, when we were out of our contract, we would all still want to work together. No one would have been, you know, offered a job in America and got seduced by that. Or we used to joke that Natalie might marry a Russian oligarch and decide not to work or something like that. But actually finding your crew, and in my case, Nils and Nat, You know, absolutely, you have to have that level of trust when you're going to start your own business, and finding those people is not easy, but once you have, it's just an absolute joy.
So, I mean, can I just ask, because you're building the agency at the moment, and you're being very successful. I mean, you just won campaign agency of the year and everything, so you're obviously really successful already. But as you build the agency, how are you sort of thinking about the people that you hire in order to create the culture that you want in the agency?
Yeah, I mean, culture is so important, isn't it? We always also love that thing of kind of culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that's really true. There's lots of Harvard business stuff that says, you know, you can change your price in a year, you know, instantly. You can change your product in a year. Your culture takes 7 years to change, which is a kind of both fascinating and terrifying thought. I mean, culture in small agencies, culture tends to come from the top, but we also think it's super important that it comes from the bottom as well. And there are some of the people we hired early doors who are just like brilliant totems of the culture, you know, silly, funny, bright, not necessarily having worked in the industry at all before, and therefore kind of doing things a bit differently. I think quite a lot of people we've hired have been people who are brilliant, but were about to chuck out of the industry, who'd had enough, and actually feel like they've found somewhere where they get to try, do things differently, and do some of the work they always wished they'd been able to do. So I sometimes feel like we're a bit of a kind of home for those of a kind of last resort, in a sense.
I mean, that's interesting to say that, because I mean, what is it that they're getting uncommon that they're not getting elsewhere, do you think?
Two things. I think we're super picky. We always said right from word go that we wanted to build brands that people in the real world were glad existed, and that means working with clients who really want to do the right thing and want to be famous for it as well. And you know, so we always look at how can we build a brand on attention, what can we do that's actually going to be useful, that people are going to love and remember, and all of that kind of stuff. And I think part of it is people got fed up with working on clients or things they didn't respect and love. And then the other part of it is, I think we push very hard to do stuff that just doesn't look like other advertising. I mean, of course, some of our stuff looks like advertising, but you know, it can be anything from trying to get Brewdog to make hand sanitizers at the beginning of the pandemic, or coming up with candles that smell like the things we're missing, or you know, for ITV, we made a hairdryer out of Piers Morgan's head to dramatize that he was full of hot air. It's just lots of silly stuff, actually. Some of it with a really serious purpose. But I think people love that. They love being given, you know, something that's important to them, that's meaningful, and then being unleashed to find interesting, different ways to make that work.
And do you think, I mean, it's interesting you say, talking about playfulness and fun, I suppose, being a real core part of what you do. I mean, do you think the industry's in danger of losing that playfulness?
Oh God, it's I mean, it's such a different industry to the kind of one I joined in the early 90s, which was, you know, pre-internet. And the thing about that was it meant you had time. You had time to go out for lunch. You had time to go up and look at a factory. You had time to go and chat to people in their living rooms. And, you know, you had time to muck around. And out of lots of mucking around comes lots of really valuable stuff. And that, I think, we're definitely in danger of losing. But having said that, we find that if you cut out an awful lot of the nonsense, actually you can still find time. So it's just a different approach. But so often you find the process that there's like loads of wasted time down the line. You know, things that take a year and a half to get a telly ad out. Are you kidding me? It's not that hard.
So staying with learning then, so what do you think is the biggest mistake that you made in your career? What did you learn from that?
You know what? I was thinking about this, and I've made so many mistakes. And, you know, I think probably like most strategists and most people generally, I always pushed a little bit to try and do things before I was quite ready. I feel like I was the teenager quite often. I was sort of thinking, oh, of course I can do this. And I was, probably a little bit out of my depth, and somebody would say, oh, we need to do some naming, and I'd think, oh, I can do that, I'll give that a go. Or when I first got promoted to kind of exec strategy director at DDB, I really didn't know how to win a pitch in the same way. But I think my gut instinct is the biggest kind of mistakes. I've just made loads of them, but actually what I've learned from it is that it's only advertising. It's only brands, it's only advertising, it's only business. You are not going to kill someone. And so actually those mistakes are never that important. And that's what's great in many ways about our business. You get to kind of, try different things, and the sort of failures are not that significant in a sense. So, my grandfather was a doctor and stuff, and you just sort of think, yeah, they didn't have room to muck around. We do. And that's probably the biggest learning, that mistakes don't really matter that much in our job. You always push yourself, you learn a bit more. And the joy of it is that we tend also to be working in teams, so other people will pick you up too. So in that sense, none of those mistakes feel like they're that important. They feel like they're just a necessary part of learning and growing. And that's sort of, to push yourself is fine in the industry, to overreach is fine in the industry, and that's kind of okay. I think that where I've probably looked back and think that wasn't cool was maybe some of the clients where I didn't really love what they were doing, didn't really think they were in it for the right reasons, and you just had to get on and work with them. Those are more the ones I regret, rather than the kind of things where I did a terrible pitch or kind of came up with an idea that was rubbish. Those sort of things don't really ever matter.
Do you think that, if you're working on something where your heart's kind of not in it because, maybe the sort of the sector or whatever it is not quite right, do you think that affects the quality of the work that you're actually doing?
Yeah, oh yeah, I think it does. I don't believe that there are dull sectors. I think you can find, some interest in almost anything, or at least I can. It's where I've struggled to love a client if I felt like they were obsessed by profit over all things, or if they were skimping on the product, or, that sort of thing frustrated me more. I actually I did things like I did the Meat and Livestock Commission during the mad cow disease. And that was like absolutely fascinating. Back then I was vegetarian as well. So it was, but actually they were delightful, and they were there representing the farmers, trying to figure out what was the right thing to do. And I got a chance to go around, do loads and loads of groups. And then we came back and recommended, you can't do mince with any offal. It's got to be over this age, all of those, no mechanically recovered meat and stuff like that. And then we'll create a quality mark. And that sort of stuff was really useful and really fascinating. So whenever I felt like people's hearts were in the right places, I was okay with it.
And I guess it's interesting because Katie Drakey, who's spoken on Firestarters as well, she was talking a bit about how strategy being a strategist is one of the few professions or roles where you have the luxury of actually really understanding, or getting to understand, how lots of different industries work, and really getting under the skin of companies and how they work and things. And so actually what a brilliant thing that is. And yeah. I think that is, do you think that is, do you share that view that actually it's a really privileged position, really, I guess, to be a strategist and planner in that respect?
Yeah, absolutely. When I look at, I don't think I've got another friend from, my mates who we all left university together. I think I'm the only one who's in the same industry still. And I'm sure part of that is because, unlike any other sector, we don't have to specialize. I don't have to spend my entire life thinking about dog food. Even consultants, they specialize in a vertical. They'll become a consultant at, whether it's Accenture or wherever, and specialize in, telecoms and media, or in finance or whatever. And I love that about our jobs, that you literally go from the sublime to the ridiculous in the matter of minutes. So yeah, and I also love that it's just about the ability to connect dots across lots of other stuff. And you work with amazing specialists who absolutely know those things at a deep level, and you get to kind of play and join them up at another level. Yeah.
So let's, I'm curious to ask about the industry here, and your kind of insight for how the industry itself is actually changing. So what do you think about the key changes that are actually happening underneath it all?
It's changed so much, hasn't it? And that's just because technology has changed around us and media has changed around us in such a kind of radical way. And I think that's been both brilliant and horrific in equal measure, as most people do. But what's been brilliant about it in some ways is that everybody has access to the same information, or a lot of it is out there. So I don't think that kind of put lipstick on a pig can work any longer. There's just too many other sources of, of information. So what it has, I think, forced everybody to do is really think hard about where you add value. You can't lie to people. You get caught out way too easily. I think that's been a great thing about the way the industry has changed. Tragic, but I think it is brilliant that that's happened. And then I think the other really interesting thing for me is that we've spent so long, I think, over the last decade and a half, coming to grips with technology and digital and all of that kind of stuff. When I started, it was like you thought about the content because there were only about 3 channels. Now I think a planner's job is to think about the context as much as the content, and that's probably the biggest single shift, I think, in my time. But that, as I say, I think there's also been this shift where I think people care much more about the values of how something's made. And for me, that's great. It gives me an excuse to kind of make clients think about doing the right thing more.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken a lot, I know, about the kind of enduring power of creativity, and and actually how that still is really at the centre of creating value for businesses in the industry and so on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd love to sort of ask a bit about that, really.
Yeah.
Because,
yeah. I mean, there is a great, and it's an old Bernbach quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's something about the fact that it takes millions of years, or it's taken millions of years for our instincts to develop, and it will take millions more for them to change. And that it's been very fashionable to talk about the changing man, but actually we should be thinking about the unchanging man. And all those kind of classic things like everybody wants to succeed, to love, take care of your family, to be admired. All of those are just unchanging impulses. And I think, a lot of our job is figuring out how do you actually weave into those? And then how do you use creativity to kind of surprise and delight people? So I absolutely think that, yes, for sure, there's been, massive move to performance marketing, to kind of actually all of that stuff, I guess, at the bottom of the funnel. But, that real kind of, why does a brand exist? What can you do to delight people, to surprise people? What problem does it fix? What tension does it kind of rest on? Those are the big questions. And to approach those with kind of both empathy and creativity, that's not going to change. That stays really critical to our industry. I think there's all that data, isn't there, that 3/4 of brands could disappear tomorrow and nobody would care. And it genuinely, I think, does take an enormous amount of creativity to figure out what problem you're going to fix and why somebody should care about you. That's hard.
Yeah, I mean, you've, I think, spoken before about the kind of sea of sameness that we're in, really, with brands often, and the need to just bring creativity and to actually make brands stand out.
Yeah.
So what did you mean by that? Why is that so important?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I think people go in waves. There was a kind of Ben Schott article a while ago about how all D2C brands suddenly had taken on the same kind of blueprint. They've all got that very kind of pastel and kind of very simple and actually it's just a joy when everything is the same, because it gives you such a big opportunity to do something different. I mean, I think we're wired that way, aren't we? You know, right from sort of being, you know, a man in the bush, you kind of go, okay, you phase out all the stuff that you're used to seeing every day, and your brain is wired to pick up noises and things which are not normal, because that's probably the sign of a predator. And so we are absolutely wired to spot those things which are different and jar and disrupt a little bit. And that's really fun. You know, we could see it was something like Habito. Everybody in the financial services sector is just trying to be nice and make you trust them. And actually, whether they're a fintech, you could see they all look exactly the same. And to go out and go, no, we're going to have, you know, disruptive skate artist Jimbo Phillips, and we're going to rip people's, you know, dramatize the hell of getting a mortgage by ripping people's hearts out of their bodies, but obviously do it in animation. That's a joy. It's just like completely different to anything else in the sector. So yeah, I love it when I find a sector where I think, God, everything's exactly the same. It's just a gift. Yeah.
I mean, there's something about there's a lot, obviously, about the power of emotion here as well, isn't there? And about being able to sort of connecting with the emotional side. I know you've spoken before about and fame as well. So fame, I think you've said, is like emotion on steroids. I like that quote.
I think I've stolen that one, probably from Peter Field. Yeah, I mean, look, I kind of grew up in you know, sitting next to Les Binet, and we spent lots of time discussing all the Byron Sharp and Ehrenberg Bass, and obviously looking at all his data, which so clearly shows that fame is the least used strategy, but the most effective one. And, you know, all of that stuff around connecting with people emotionally is way more important than the rational stuff. And to be honest, most people don't have that great, compelling, rational stories. It's pretty rare. So it absolutely makes sense to me. You know, and we're wired we learn about the world through stories, and stories are all about emotion and character and people. So it absolutely stacks up that brands are the same.
So what about looking forwards into the future then? What's your prediction about where the industry is going?
Yeah, it's you know, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think we have been so focused on the industrialization and digitalization of brands and their CX and CRM, and we've spent all our time, I think, worrying about the tech stack rather than necessarily the people. And I sort of feel like we absolutely had to do all of that stuff, and it's really important. But I'm hoping that actually now we've spent that much time on that, there's a chance to now really think about what we're putting through the pipes a bit more. So I do think, you know, if we've spent the last decade, I guess, thinking about that stuff, I'd like to see that actually we're going to be spending a bit more of the next decade thinking about the people at the end of it and at the beginning of it. And my gut instinct is that over the next few years, we're going to see 2 or 3 really big. I think we've already seen mental health emerging as a massive issue over the pandemic, and I think that will carry on. We can see that going for a while. I think inequality is going to be a massive issue, which isn't going anywhere fast, unfortunately. And then the environment. So brands that are thinking about how they help in any of those spaces, or at least how they understand the, you know, impact of those on their customers, are going to be the ones that really, really succeed over the next kind of decade. But yeah, as I say, I think a lot of it has been about, you know, the rise of MarTech over the last decade. And I feel like, yeah, that's not going to go away, but actually maybe it's not going to be quite such an obsession.
Yeah.
Maybe we can think about what we're doing with that MarTech a bit more now.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about some of the really big themes, obviously like equality and sustainability and environment and so on. And brand purpose has been a sort of kicked about sort of thing
Yeah.
for the last year or so, I guess, or longer than that. But there's lots of debate about it. So what's your kind of position really on the merits or not of brand purpose?
So look, I mean, I kind of go, look, not every brand has to be about saving the world, but every brand has to know exactly why they exist and why somebody would care about them. And that's what you need to be focusing on. And sometimes, you know, that is about something really deep and powerful, important. And sometimes it's about something really fun and frivolous, but wonderful. So I don't think purpose has to always be about that kind of saving the world stuff. And the other thing I'd say is that, I mean, it's really obvious, but there's too much, I'm going to launch a purpose. But actually you should be launching what you're doing. And then, you know, you can talk about that for sure. But I think we saw that, didn't we, in the pandemic, too many brands going, we're with you, we're here to help, but actually not doing anything to help. You know, that's what's great actually about, we were very lucky. We had lots of brands like, you know, ITV did Britain Get Talking Mark II, which was their mental health campaign. Brewdog, we encouraged them to do the hand sanitizer thing, which they went away and did. But what I loved about that was that James got it wrong to begin with. It was not enough proportion of alcohol in the hand sanitizers, and everyone kicked off and went, oh, just Brewdog trying to do a stunt again. And he quietly went away and got it right and gave millions to the NHS. And then we had Ecova, who are another one of our clients, who are sustainable laundry. They, I mean, to the point where they felt very uncomfortable about the additional profit they were making from the pandemic. It did not sit well with them to be making profit out of it. And so they created a fund. Well, we helped them. We came up with the idea of creating a little green fund called the Fertilize the Future Fund. So that additional money that they made out of the pandemic, they created this fund which people who had great green sustainable business ideas could pitch to them. So for me, like, purpose is only a thing if you're actually going to do something about it. Otherwise, just don't go there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So a lot of the examples and the great work that Uncommon has done has actually not been advertising. You've got lots of interesting ideas that come to life in different ways, and you call yourself a creative studio rather than an advertising agency. So, I mean, do you think a big part of the future of the industry is actually that, is actually not having just advertising as an output?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, I don't know, there's all the data says, yes, TV still works, all the rest of it. But I don't know about you, but I watch very little telly and see very little advertising. I see, you know, lots on the internet. I see some on the tube, if I was ever on the tube, that sort of stuff. But it's changed versus the amount I used to watch. But I still hear about and find out about brilliant things brands have done. Or I find out, I love a piece of packaging or something that they've done. So I just think we've got lots and lots of other ways to express what a brand is about rather than just advertising. It's one of the things in the armory, not the only thing. And that's fun as well. It's fun to do all kinds of different stuff. That's absolutely, you know, what brands I think do get noticed for. The same just telly campaign all the time is not the only answer.
So I guess, you know, a lot of the instances you talked about there, they different ideas, lots of diverse things. How do you get to those things? I mean, it could be anything. It's not like you're briefing in a print ad or a TV ad. So it could be absolutely anything as an output. So how do you get there? I
think the first thing to say is, yeah, it could be almost anything, and it doesn't really matter. I suspect there are lots of different things you could do. So, you know, part of that is just going, okay, well, that one will be good. So with that one, let's just decide which. But I mean, honestly, we're looking at really the audience. We're looking at, you know, what's their community, where do they go, what's their network, all the kind of, what technology do they like, what partners can we do, what collaboration. We have a little wheel of stuff that we look at. But you're right, it is quite random, and a lot of it will come down to budget and feasibility, rather than sort of thinking this is the perfect thing we could do. Kind of going, yeah, that works, and it's on budget, let's go for it. I think that's kind of important to free yourself up from trying to find the perfect answer.
Yeah, I mean, and does it sort of change the process at all? Like, you know, how you work with creatives and.
No, we tend to come to a kind of brand platform idea like everybody else does, and that's really important, getting that right. So you've got your kind of brand on a page, and you know what tension you might be going after, and you know what people. So those kind of things are really important. You know what your distinctive kind of memory structures are, or that sort of stuff, and you know where there's room and place to play. But yeah, and I think Nils is great at pushing teams to kind of go, right, you know, what's the behavior? What more could we do? Where else could we go? What's the product? What's the collab? What's the tweet? You know, we always love that, actually. I think it's quite helpful. Certainly James Watt of Brewdog definitely looks at and judges things with, will it look good in a tweet and a picture? Is it that simple that, you know, I can sort of talk about the idea like that? That's quite a helpful thing too, I think.
So let me ask you my final catch-all question. What's the question that you wish that I'd asked you, and what's your answer to it?
I really struggled with this, actually, and I haven't got a brilliant. Everybody else will have thought about a very clever answer, and I haven't got one. A clever question, rather. There are two questions I thought about, and one was, you know, what surprised me most about setting up an agency, and then I thought that was boring, probably not that interesting to people. And so the question I kind of, maybe it's because I'm getting older, and I'm, you know, increasingly thinking about, well, looking at the sort of, you know, 20 plus years I've worked in the industry, and sort of think about, well, what do I want to leave behind? What have I done? Have I done anything that's made the industry or the world a little better or worse than when I began? And I think that's sort of one of those questions that you ask the more senior and old you get. I've noticed that with clients a lot, and we actually always find that a really great time to find a client. Lots of clients, I think, get to a certain point in seniority and they start looking at what their legacy is, and what they've done for the world and for their industry. And I think that's sort of almost a really great question to ask. So that's probably the question I in a way, I wish you'd asked. What could we do to kind of change the industry? How would you like to leave it better than when you started it, I guess? And for me, I think it is that, honestly, it's that thing of, I think there are absolutely brilliant, smart, funny, clever people in the industry, but we've got kind of pigeonholed into a very small, narrow bit of, you know, we're asked for 30 yards of advertising. And actually, I think that's a massive, massive waste of creativity and smart people. So if there's one thing that I could kind of do, I'd love to sort of say, by the time we kind of leave Uncommon, that we've kind of proven that creativity can be this much more interesting force that can be applied all over the place, and that actually that's valuable and people will pay us for it. But that would be my, you know, my big thing, I think.
Okay.
You know, you don't spend as much time in the industry and kind of not look at how brilliant the people are and feel annoyed by how underutilized so many of them are.
I mean, that question about sort of what your legacy is, I mean, I think I guess there's something about boldness here, isn't it? And to wanting to perhaps be a bit bolder, and, you know, do you think actually in the industry we need to be a bit bolder about things?
Oh, totally. I mean, but then I say that in the very lucky position where we will fire a client. We will decide we don't want to work with a client. We don't have quarterly numbers to hit. Yes, we have to find work for the people we've employed, but we don't have any of that pressure. Certainly when I was in holding company, you were very much thinking about, I need to grow, I need to make more money, I need to do X, Y, Z. And that's a really dangerous trap. Whereas thinking about, will we be able to do great work with this client? Are we going to learn something working with them? Are we going to love it? And are we going to get paid, as the last question, almost? Whereas I think everybody in holding company land thinks about the money as the first question. So for us, I think, yeah, we need to be back in that place. And there's a bit of me that looks at it and goes, the independent agencies are the agencies over the last year or 2 years that have all done better. And I think that is fundamentally because we can approach things differently. We're not beholden unto the kind of short-term quarterly holdings. And if you speak to anyone in other businesses, they would say the same thing as well. It's not just in the advertising industry. So, yeah, so I think that's important.
Lucy, that's been fantastic, super insightful. We're at the end of the time, unfortunately, but I could talk to you all day. But thank you for being a part of Firestarters. It's been super cool.
I can't believe it's been going 10 years. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's your legacy right there and then.
That's very nice of you to say. But yeah, great. And thank you so much again for your time and for being part of Firestarters. Delighted to have you. And for everybody watching, don't forget to subscribe and to like the video. So thanks again to Lucy Jameson.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.